Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. A very warm welcome to everyone. I hope you're all well and thank you for joining us today. So from time to time we do our discussion shows on Truth Sentinel. Today we're going to do something slightly different, and then we're going to choose controversial topics. So we're going to talk about articles that bring up controversial topics. Today's topics are related to racism, breastfeeding and vegetarianism. This is part 1 and next week will be part 2. So welcome to our first controversial topics episode. Today we're going to have an episode discussing a few controversial topics that have cropped up in the news. I'll briefly introduce the topic and give an opinion, then everyone will chip in with some comments, opinions, and where necessary or appropriate, talk about whether their views could change, etc. Remember, you can join in too, listeners, by going to www.truthsentinel.co.uk anytime and leaving a voicemail or writing in the chat box there. I'm joined today by Seth Davis from 2 Real News, who's joined us many times before. Based in Washington State, I believe. He can correct me in a second, if not. Phil Gardner, who's usually looking after permacultures, whatever those are, in Portugal. Anthony, who is back at the origins of the foothills of the Himalayas, near the highest ice rink in the world, about 1,000 meters above sea level in Almaty, Kazakhstan. I'm on the island of Koh Samui in Thailand, training to be a fighter, a Thai boxer. On the subject of fighting, the only rules today are no fighting, scratching or biting. Let's begin. First, a quick hello to everyone.
Hey, Scott. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. You are in Washington, aren't you, Seth?
Yes, sir. Washington State, not D.C., not to be confused.
Yeah, I see. I said Washington State. I've got it right.
Things are going pretty good here, Scott. Got some nice late summer weather. How are things going for you there in Thailand?
Things are pretty good. I'm in a bit of a routine of waking up, doing a little bit of work, Thai boxing, doing a bit more work, and then going to sleep. I'm not really good at routines, but I'm trying to get used to it for a while and plan to be doing this until Christmas time anyway.
Sounds good. Well, Anthony, how are things going there in Almaty?
Oh, pretty good. I just got back. Scott mentioned I've been traveling a bit during the summer, and I spent a bit of time working in Finland. So that's my sort of go-to place if you want to get away from the stresses of life. So I feel very refreshed. And I'm in the country at the moment. I'm on a dacha. So, yeah, things are good. Things are very good.
And Phil, how's things?
I'm good too. Yeah. This seems like a while since we've all been together. Actually, quite a long while. It's been a busy summer, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, it has been a while, and it seems kind of strange that we're all back and reunited, and the first thing we want to do is have some arguments. Actually, they're not arguments.
I have a feeling, for the most part, we're going to have a fairly similar outlooks on a significant amount of this type of stuff. It might be a little bit of a difference of opinion there, as it were, but I don't think we're going to have anything major. At least we shouldn't.
I totally emphatically disagree with you, Seth.
I'm hoping you're completely wrong, Seth, as well, actually. I'm looking forward to these arguments for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, our first topic is racism, and the question really is, are you a racist if you say something racist accidentally? The examples I gave to these guys were, you call a group of kids little monkeys, but then a bystander reports you for being racist because they point out one of the children is black, and that's kind of a racist term. The other one that was cropped up in the news was Ellen DeGeneres' internet meme with her riding on the back of Usain Bolt, who's recently won the 100 meters again, as usual, in the Olympics, and her on his back with a tagline saying she's found someone to run errands for her. She was branded a racist on social media, and she's since apologized. So the question is that racist? Is she a racist for not deliberately intending to cause offence? So my opinion is that intention does matter. If you're not intending to be racist, then you shouldn't be lambasted for being a racist. You're not actually a racist. You've made a mistake. Or even you haven't made a mistake. Other people have perceived it as racist when it isn't. So if you're not being racist, people shouldn't accuse you of being so. There's plenty of real racists out there, as we know. It dilutes the real issues by playing this game of political correctness. Calling people racist as a result of political correctness is just annoying and doesn't really help matters at all. And there is, as I discussed with Anthony the other day, there is ingrained racism where you say something where you think it's not racist because of your upbringing or your circumstances. Maybe it's just a result of your culture and you've said something which other people might think's racist. Maybe then you're not intending to be racist, but if you took a step back, you might agree that it could offend other people. So there is, it's not completely black and white, to use a bit of a pun there. Anthony, you have strong views on this.
I do have strong views, but my strong views are strong views in favor of caution. I mean to say, I've heard a lot of this kind of stuff from people in the truth movement, talking about incidents where someone is branded a racist for a comment which clearly didn't have racist intent behind it. And like you said, that really does make a difference. And when these people get condemned, it is a problem. It is something that we perhaps should point out. But I also think we need to be a bit careful here, because when we raise this topic, we're raising it because, bullshit annoys us and we want people to behave rationally. So we kind of say, like, people are too easily branded racist nowadays because we want, public discourse to be honest. But sometimes talking about this kind of stuff inadvertently, I think, gives some free ammunition to kind of far-right conservative truck nuts who aren't honest in what they say about this topic. So if they'll jump on an example like the Ellen DeGeneres thing, and they'll go, look, the loony left is destroying the country with political correctness. They say that for a different reason than we say it. They say it to try and get people on board with their own agenda, which is like anti-diversity and anti-immigrant and so on. So, this is not an agenda we want to feed into. And it means when we discuss this issue of racism, we need to be a little careful and be clear that we're not discussing it because we want to feed this kind of anti-diversity agenda. The kind of Fox News kind of stuff, like, oh my God, society's being destroyed and soon we won't have Christmas, etc. Because what we're saying, I think, is quite distinct from that. So all I wanted to point out here is we need to be a little careful not to be supporting the arguments of people who we ultimately don't agree with.
Well, I think that's a very interesting position, Anthony, and honestly, not exactly very far from that myself. I'd say we just one needs to use caution with a lot of this, but at the same time, one has to wonder where it becomes giving adherence to the ideas of political correctness above and beyond regular discourse, where rather than just simply thinking about what you're going to say before you say it, you literally start to censor yourself and censor ideas. And I understand on both sides of that issue, they've always got the Fox News type crowd, or the very conservative in the quote alternative media of Breitbart or Alex Jones or something like that. They begin to push the idea that like the fall of the West of all immigrants, or how white people are being systematically targeted, this, that, and this very ridiculous, contrived narrative. However, I think it's equally important to look at the opposite side of that contrived narrative, that is this call everything and everybody racist, which itself makes racism become, as you said, a little bit more immune to inspection and immune to people literally being able to call it out for what it is, because it creates this fatigue, this cultural fatigue, where people in general just become tired of hearing that everyone and everything possible is racist. And so thus it creates this culture that feeds into, as you brought up, this very right-wingy or very nationalist or very ethnicist sort of an ideology, by making people think, well, hey, is it really so bad? Because, I mean, people have just gone above and beyond of calling every conceivable thing you could ever think of, including Ellen DeGeneres riding on the back of Usain Bolt in a meme, in a ridiculous Photoshop meme somebody put together, because he's fast. Not because he's black, but because he is literally, like, well, the fastest guy on earth. And so thus, no, it must be because he's black. Like, if he was white, or if he was Asian, or if he was Hispanic, and he was that fast. No, I'm sure if he was Hispanic too, it would be racist. In fact, anybody, unless he was white, it would be racist. Because naturally, that is the weird, quote, left-wing part of the same cultural vulture that is perched atop humanity, getting us to fight over such contrived issues as quote-unquote race, which honestly, I'm just going to come out here and say it. Other than human race, I really personally, and this is a belief system here, and I'm sure there will be people that disagree with me on this, race other than humanity is not actually a thing. What all these people are arguing and falsely call race are actually nationality, ethnicity, and in some cases religion, because there are people that will refer to somebody that is bigoted against Islam, or bigoted against Muslim people or Jewish people, as being a racist. And, well, necessarily maybe this person is bigoted against the religious values of these people, but religion is not a race. ethnicity is not a race. Nationality is not a race. So that itself does seem like a very contrived part of this narrative that people can put together to have us completely wrapped around their finger. Because, of course, they have both sides of the narrative totally covered, because it's a false narrative in the first place of this idea that white and black, I mean, even literally using the colors, white and black, the terms there, to have people as diametrically opposed as humanly possible. And, I mean, I'll give it up to Phil here and everything to close her out and see what we can deduce from everyone's collective opinions. But that's all I got to say on it.
Thanks, Seth. I was really looking for something in what you both were saying that I could argue against, but especially what you said, Seth, about the human race. That's what I kind of hold quite close to my own heart as well. This looking for separation and difference in nationality, in religion and ethnicity and just any kind of background to a human life seems a little bit insane in this day and age. It's always been insane, but it seems even more insane in this day and age when you'd have thought we should know better as a human race. The other thing I'd really like to say is you're always going to offend someone. You know, no matter how well-intentioned your words are, someone always takes those words and twists them to meet their own meaning, their own personal meaning. And everyone has a personal meaning towards every single word in any language. We all pick up certain characteristics to the way we interpret a particular word or a particular sentence, simply through our own backgrounds, our own experiences that we've had throughout our lives. And so one word can mean just a plethora of different things to different people. And so it's almost impossible to say anything without offending someone and saying something that is going to be perceived as racist to someone else. And I mean, it's crazy when I've been amongst friends of mine who are black. Even some people will find that racist if I call someone black. But I have black friends who call themselves black, and they're calling each other the N-words, the nigger word. They call each other nigger all the time. And yet this sort of echoes what you were saying, Seth. Like if a white man says that word, then it's considered absolutely racist, even if there's no bad intention behind the word at all, even if it's just said as like some camaraderie amongst friends. The caution that you were talking about, Anthony, yes, I think very necessary at times, but also I just sometimes think people need to be offended. People need to be offended in some ways because it helps them to bring all the rubbish to the surface of their own consciousness, you know, all the things that are affecting them subconsciously. People sometimes need to feel that offense, to really see it clearly, rather than sort of be quietly offended underneath the surface and allow yourself to become like this plugged up volcano that's going to explode at some point later on in life.
I mean, this is something that I heartily agree with, actually. And I think Scott and I were talking about this last night, and I suspected it was going to come up in connection with another topic we're going to discuss. But about being offended. I mean, this is a huge thing now, and it is part of this political correctness movement, you know. And I think it's worth saying that really nobody has the right never to be offended. You know, people who scream the most about being offended, what they're often kind of saying is, I never want anyone to put me in a situation where I'm uncomfortable throughout my entire life. And I want the government to legislate so that I never feel uncomfortable with anything that anyone says or does. And to me, that seems like the ultimate in entitlement, you know. To paraphrase an Australian comedian, Steve Hughes, you know, be offended. Like, if someone says something that offends you, be offended. Nothing happens. You wake up the next day, everybody's fine. Yes. So sometimes I think, you know, this kind of, I found that offensive thing can go too far. People can assume for themselves rights that they don't have to always be comfortable.
And the funny thing is, on the racist topic, it seems that a lot of the people who are offended are actually white people. And I think their offence is because they can't, I don't know, there's some sort of shame or guilt that they hold inside them as part of a collective consciousness, I reckon. and they can't sort of face it themselves. They can't face their own potential to offend or be racist or be judgmental or prejudiced in some way. And so they like to be able to throw that onto others, to basically blame others for their own potential for prejudice, and hence make all of these rules and regulations around political correctness. And again, it's sort of part of this insanity. The only other thing I'd say is, like, echoing what you were saying about caution, Anthony, was like, I saw an article the other day on Islamist immigrants in Germany who'd sexually abused German women during a festival parade. And I was looking at the comments below, and there were thousands, hundreds and hundreds of comments, and they nearly all incited conflict. There was one Muslim who was saying, if you dress like a whore, and I'm paraphrasing this, but if you dress like a whore, you must expect to be treated like a whore. And then the backlash against him, understandably so, was this whole host of comments from non-Muslims saying things like, well, I'm from the US, and the US Army is going to massacre all of you and we'll kill you, and just all of this violence and aggression. And you got dragged into this hole, basically, this dark sort of void, all based around immigrants, and especially Islamist immigrants in Europe. And then there were loads of links to other articles that were talking. There was another article about immigrants in Sweden, and a lot of Swedish women, young women, have been raped by Muslim men. There were articles about various other European nations that have had all of these Muslim immigrants and were getting really fed up about it all. And so you just read this one article, and your mindset kind of got dragged into this particular way of seeing immigrants. And it became almost, you could see how racism and any kind of prejudice was incited simply through the way this article was written. And then on the opposite side of that, there was another article that I read a bit later that was on a page about refugees fleeing Syria and ending up on beaches in Greece and Italy. And although they were struggling with poverty themselves, these Italian and Greek families were taking all these people, these Syrian refugees, into their homes, feeding them, sorting out first aid, water and food supply stations. And my mindset was totally different. So you can get kind of dragged into like a racist mindset, and you can get dragged into a really friendly mindset. On the end of that last article about the Syrian families fleeing, there were lots of people quoting things like, I don't see Muslims, I see humans in need, or I'm not interested in what religion people come from. I'm friends with many Muslims myself. And, all of this kind of lack of separation between different peoples. And it was, almost the polar opposite of the previous article. So you can see how people just get drawn into this sort of almost mass hysteria, this kind of mob rule way of thinking. And I just found that quite interesting. And it was just a way it was just something else to add to this talk on racism.
Absolutely. I think it really, those are excellent examples of something that I think I was kind of ineptly trying to say, which is when you step as soon as you step into the public square, you do have the potential to, I suppose, turn the debate a little in a positive direction, or turn the debate a little in a destructive direction. And so what I'm saying is, you do need to be careful about what effect your comments are going to have on the debate overall.
You do indeed. Social media is a good example of that. I mean, any comments under any kind of video on YouTube or on other social media, if you look at the comments and there's a large number of them, doesn't take very long for it to break down. And it kind of, sometimes it kind of, to me, sort of symbolizes the world, and how when there's so many people and so many nations with different viewpoints, in any kind of discussion or interaction between a large number of people, it doesn't take long before there's a breakdown at some point.
Oh, indeed.
I think that's true. The first time I ever saw that was when I was watching a documentary about the Balkan conflicts many years ago, and I saw the YouTube comments underneath the documentary, and people from the various countries in the former Yugoslavia, people were just outright saying, "I'm going to kill you. We're coming around to your house with guns, and we're going to kill you." Or you know, you guys are murderers. You're all serial killers. Every single Serb or every single Croat is a serial killer and a maniac. Like, it was just horrifying what people were saying. That was the first time I'd ever seen it. Since then, I've seen many, many more things like this about a whole variety of topics. And yeah, it is a little frightening. Though I think, and I think Seth will agree with me about this, we also have to understand that there are people out there in the world who are being paid to make sure this happens on various issues.
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely, well, you know, my opinion here is the guy from America, you know, the land of the racist, land of the bigot. I mean, in the eyes of pretty much the entire freaking world here. I will say on the Islamic topic, that is 100% pushed here on the racism, or rather bigotry against Islamic immigrants, like religious bigotry, that's been pushed ever since the first Gulf War. I mean, here it's literally, we live in a land where it's not okay to be racist in the mainstream against African Americans. It's not okay to be racist against anybody, to be bigoted against anybody other than essentially Muslims in this country. It is completely and totally kosher to be racist against Muslims in America, and it is ridiculous. It is absolutely asinine. I've heard people say some of the most horrible, bigoted stuff I've ever heard in my entire life in public situations where you're literally in front of dozens and dozens of people and can just say terrible things about Islamic people, and it's totally fine. If they were to have said this about any other group of people, religion, ethnicity, nationality, whatever, they would be totally lambasted for being just the most horrible bigot in the world. But it's okay. And I mean, the reason they're saying it's all okay is, of course, because our country's at war over there. And I mean, racism and war, or bigotry and war, go hand in hand. Because, I mean, what better way to get perfectly able-bodied young men and women to go out and kill other human beings than to vilify the ever-loving shit out of them for years, months, maybe even, if you go back really far, decades in some cases, literally priming them just to go over and kill people because the vested interests that want to essentially take resources, take whatever it is, gain political power from these areas, need to use a proxy force because they themselves have neither the manpower nor the balls to do any of it themselves. I mean, look at the division here in the United States with guys like George Soros and Warren Buffett funding things directly, in the case of George Soros, funding things like the contrived side of the Black Lives Matter movement, which in many cases, as far as the leadership, is not at all interested in civil rights stuff. I mean, many of the average people on the street there that are at these protests, whether they're under a false perspective or not, have, for the most part, good intentions. But the people at the very top of a lot of this stuff that are saying such radical things, because in some cases these people are literally saying, like, spewing just outright bigotry. And it's completely fine for them to say this because it creates the division. And, of course, it creates this false backlash of the police state defender or closet bigot on the other side of this, or the closet racist, as the mainstream would refer to it as, that can say something like, what is it? All lives matter, and suddenly that is racist. However, I will say there are certain people that kind of use this coded language to talk back and forth. But I think that all of this is to keep the debate, as it were, the conversation from the middle ground. Facebook, social media in general, Twitter, will promote this 100%. People that are hardcore Islamophobic and can promote Muslim bashing all day will be promoted by these websites and can have huge, just enormous followings, as well as, let's say, radical Islam, such as ISIS on Twitter or Facebook, where literally they can post videos calling people to the cry of cutting people's heads off and shit, and that's completely fine in the media. But you have a middle ground thing of trying to bring people together, guarantee you that will be one of the very first things shut down in the debate, because how dare you, you will be assaulted on both sides from the radicals on the left, as it were, and the radicals on the right for not being some sort of lunatic.
And I'm going to have to shut you down from both sides, Seth, because we need to move on to the next topic. Seth there used foul language twice there, and if anyone was offended, as Phil said, sometimes you need to be offended.
Damn straight.
Actually, I offended someone once by referring to a black person as African American. Sometimes it's just the labels are difficult. She was offended because she was from South Africa and said people have no right to call themselves African American when they're not. They've never been to Africa. That's just a side point.
Yeah, I offended someone once by calling a Pakistani person Pakistani. And the person I offended was actually a white English woman, and yeah, she didn't like it at all.
That's because you're very offensive, Phil. most of the time.
I can be, but I didn't know what I defended. What can I call a person who's from Pakistan? If in that situation, it was just I was confused.
It's really interesting what Seth was saying there about being able to say things about one particular group that are forbidden to say about another group. I actually think, and this is kind of moving into another topic, but I do think that it's an interesting fact that societies do seem to need a group that they can dump on. I think every society has that group. Just to give you a random example, in Australia, it is now Muslims, but back when I lived there, it was Germans and smokers. You could say anything you like about the Germans, which if you said the same thing about the Italians or the French or the Japanese, people would be all over you. And the other group, of course, is smokers. They became the kind of the vilified out group. The treatment of smokers was such that, if you treated any other group in this way, there'd be an outcry. And I really think that in some twisted way, societies need this out group. It's something that perhaps, we need to kind of get over as a species. But certainly at the moment, we're not over it.
Just time for a quick break to tell you a bit about this show and let you know about some up-and-coming guests. Hello, I'm Scott, host of Truth Sentinel. We do weekly podcast shows covering topics connected to psychology, philosophy, political corruption, conspiracies, mysteries, world events, paranormal, and scientific advancements. Our episodes are recorded from diverse locations such as the UK, Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Vietnam, and Thailand. Find us on YouTube and also listen to us on the networks. Feel free to make a donation or buy a t-shirt, which gives us a small donation too. Use the code TRUTH1 for a 10% discount. Thanks for listening. That 10% discount for t-shirts can be found at trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com, and use the code TRUTH1 to get your 10% discount, and we get that small donation. You can also make donations at our website as well. I also wanted to talk about a very special guest we have coming on, none other than the great man himself, the Dice Man, Luke Reinhardt. Check out the book that was written in the 1970s, which changed the world and was a cult bestseller. It's about a man who throws a dice to decide everything he does. We're talking about the philosophy behind that and about his new book, which touches on a lot of the topics we talk about on our show. So I hope you join us and check us out again at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Thanks for listening. Let's get on with today's show anyway. Okay, our next topic is vegetarianism. I was inspired to talk about this topic by Phil, who released a video on Facebook showing the mistreatment of animals during the milking process of producing milk, where they take away the young calves from the mothers at an early age. And it showed this, it showed them being just treated awfully, basically, and being clubbed to death. And so the next topic is the treatment of animals and the mass extermination of animals for meat is unacceptable, and we should all be vegetarians or vegans. A bit of a provocative statement there. The example was, as I just said, calves are dragged away from their mothers shortly after birth and then clubbed to death whilst mothers continue to produce milk. And so I just wondered what you guys think. But first of all, I'll give my quick opinion. I'm not a vegetarian, and I sometimes have the odd hamburger. Saying that, during recent trips back to the UK, I've found vegetarian alternatives are getting better and better. In fact, there's some vegetarian burgers now which just taste almost identical to a hamburger. And there's lots of alternatives cropping up now in the UK in the supermarkets, which are making it increasingly easier if you were considering the switch. It's not happening consistently worldwide yet, so if you're a traveller, it's a little bit harder to be a vegetarian. I wouldn't knowingly want to eat meat or drink milk from an animal that suffered in a brutal way, as I saw in the video that Phil shared, and I would demand at the very least that there's at least some due care of animals. But I suppose anyone who's going to be in that kind of job isn't going to be an animal lover. I could see myself eliminating meat out of my diet if it became easier to do so, basically. I'm also finding that when I get ill abroad, I can usually trace it back to eating meat as being the culprit of my illness in relation to food food sicknesses or something like that. So I'm at least trying to cut down on meat, and I would consider eliminating it from my diet. But I don't know if I feel strongly enough about it yet, although that video certainly caught my attention. I think it's okay to kill and eat animals for food for survival, but that's not really what's happening on a worldwide basis. We don't. Do we really need to eat meat? That's a question I'll put to listeners. Let us know what you think, and let us know about any of these topics again. I'm slightly on the fence then, but I can see myself being converted with some help from my fellow humans and from food production industry. So what do you guys think?
Again, I mean, this is an incredibly complex issue, and it's an emotional issue for a lot of people. You know, I, as you know, live in the Russian-speaking world, and here, if you try to defend vegetarianism, you'll be quickly shouted down by a lot of people. It's something that people feel very strongly about here. Yeah, I mean,
just to clarify, Anthony, strongly in which way would you say? In Kazakhstan, for example, because I know what you're going to say, but just to let listeners in.
The majority of people are against vegetarianism here, and also as a foreigner here, you get sort of pigeonholed. There's an attitude that you sometimes come across where people assume that because you're a foreigner, you are a vegetarian. It's kind of, yeah, it's a strange one. But anyway, I think it is a minefield because you've got so many issues here. You do have, you know, the health issue. Human bodies have some features which mark them as meat eaters and some features which mark them as non-meat eaters. So we're somewhere in between, just by a kind of evolutionary quirk. And that's, you know, that sort of then leaves the issue open. And then we've got you know, modern animal production methods, which as we saw in that video can sometimes be absolutely horrendous. I also think, though, there is an environmental dimension to this issue. So just to give you a brief example, in 2006, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization produced a report called Livestock's Long Shadow. And in that report, they said the livestock sector is a major stressor on many ecosystems and on the planet as a whole. And globally, it's one of the largest sources of greenhouse gases and the leading causal factors in the loss of biodiversity. And in developed and emerging countries, it's perhaps the leading source of water pollution. Now, if you break that down a little further, you find out that not all livestock places an equal amount of stress on the environment. So here's one argument, and this is just one of many, but I'll give you one perspective and you can tell me what you think of it. There is an argument to say avoid beef, or cut down on beef. We don't need everybody in the world to become a vegetarian, but if everybody worldwide just cut down on the amount of beef they ate a little bit, this would take the edge off many of the environmental problems that we're now facing. For example, you need 7 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of beef, whereas you only need 3 kilos to produce 1 kilo of pork, and 2 kilos of grain for 1 kilo of chicken. So this really marks out beef as more kind of land intensive, putting more stress on the environment than other forms of meat. And so I think it's an issue for everybody to work out for themselves. It is a very personal issue, but I do think that that there are several things to think about if you are considering, you know, vegetarianism. There is that you know, your own personal health. There is also these wider concerns like the environmental impact of your own food habits. Yeah, so I'm interested to hear what Phil has to say about this, because he's actually far more directly involved in this than I think, you know, us three.
Yeah, Anthony, I couldn't say much more, and certainly not in any better way than you already said. The environmental aspect of this is a huge one for me, and basically because it's due to our consumption of meat that most of the forests in the world have been cut down, because we think that most of the forests are cut down so that we can turn it into agricultural land, so that we can grow crops that will be eaten by us. But actually, most of the crops, agricultural crops, the industrial agriculturally grown crops, are grown to feed the animals, to give us the meat that we buy in the supermarkets. So it's a crazy system because it takes up so much agricultural land to feed all the animals that we desire for our meat eating. And there are various different reports on our ability to continue feeding this growing world population. But a lot of reports, especially from the permaculture sort of corner of things, which is, you mentioned this earlier, Scott, like permaculture. Permaculture is about a permanent agriculture, which basically means it's not a dying agriculture. And all industrial agriculture at the moment is basically killing the land, killing the soil because of its use of chemicals, because of the monocrops and things like that. So permaculture is meant to be a way of bringing diversity, ecological diversity into our agriculture. So it's a much more natural way of growing food. However, our industrial agriculture, and especially the meat industry, means that we destroy that kind of the natural processes and cycles of nature that we find in nature. So by growing monocrops, which is a single crop in a piece of land, you take away all diversity and you increase the need for chemical fertilizers, for pesticides, and various other herbicides and so on. And you decrease the plant's ability to be able to fend for itself against diseases, against pests, against all sorts of things. And then you need this huge input of other resources. So, for example, I saw in this film called The Queen of the Sun, all about bees. I saw in this film swathes and swathes of land in America that are all put over to the almond trees. And it's got to the stage where, I mean, there are literally thousands of square kilometers of almond trees and nothing else. And it's got to the stage where there's so little diversity that people have to become kind of nomad beekeepers in order to pollinate all of the flowers, the blossoms on the almond trees so that they actually give their fruit. And that means hundreds and hundreds of different beekeepers from all over the country drive their beehives for thousands of miles to the place where the almond trees are so that they can be pollinated. Because without that happening, you wouldn't have any almonds left. So that's just like one example of what happens in industrial agriculture. And the Amazon being cut down is usually to grow things like soybeans and various other single crops that all feed the cattle, mostly the cattle industry in the US and various other places around the world. And so it's kind of, when we look at the meat industry, when we think about vegetarianism, it's not just about, as Anthony was saying, it's not just about your own personal preference, your diet, your health, and so on. It has this huge global impact that is actually difficult to fathom, especially if you don't know all of the facts. And there are so many different things, there's so much different information in there that it's difficult to sort of have a grasp of the whole picture.
So can I ask, Phil, as I understand it, permaculture involves trying to create symbiotic relationships between different living things. So, for example, you should find a way in which you can grow fish and at the same time use some part of that process to also grow a crop. And the crop then fertilizes something else, which in turn feeds the fish. So it goes in a cycle. That's my understanding of it. Maybe it's a little wrong. But it seems to me the challenge is that can work on a fairly small scale, but on a massive industrial scale, how do you apply a model like that to, like feeding literally millions of people from a few industrial farms? I don't see. Yeah. I think that translating it to the scale we need could be very difficult.
So what you were saying about permaculture is right, and that's certainly one aspect of permaculture. But it's actually a design system that came out of two people from Australia, actually. And the whole design of it is basically so the energy that you put into the piece of land that you're looking after is less than or equal to the energy that you're getting out. And at the moment, all of the energy that goes into industrial agriculture is far more than the energy we get out. And that's in terms of the energy that we get from the foods that is absorbed by our bodies. And so that's why it's a permanent agriculture, is that it's like it doesn't require the use of lots of big machinery, lots of fuel to run that machinery and so on. And it means you don't have this linear system that we have in society. So in society at the moment, we sort of think that it's never ending, but basically we get resources as an input to come into a city or a whole nation, and then loads of waste as an output. And slowly we realized over the last sort of 20 years that that's impossible to sustain. You can't keep on doing that, because where are the resources going to continue coming from? What's going to happen to all of that waste? It's got to go somewhere. So permaculture is more about mimicking the cycles of nature, making it a circular metabolism rather than this linear metabolism that we think we can get away with forever. And as soon as you start moving in circles, you start realizing your waste is the resource. And at the moment, the meat industry is a prime example of a linear system, where we keep sort of cutting down more forests so that we can keep growing more crops that will feed the animals that we require for our meat. And we don't realize that the waste, like you already mentioned, the waste in terms of greenhouse gases, the waste in terms of all the pollutants, especially the water pollutants and so on, it can't continue. To actually answer your original question, Anthony, in the Second World War, we in the UK were having difficulty feeding all the troops that were fighting abroad. And what happened was you had this sort of home army, I guess, of all the women who were left behind, all of the young children, all of the families, and they were encouraged to grow their own crops in whatever piece of land they could find in their own gardens or in the village green or whatever. And more food was grown by individual homes and families during the war years than was ever produced by industrial agriculture during that time. And
Wow.
The same is happening actually in Russia at the moment, is that more vegetable produce is being grown by individual people on dachas than is produced by the whole sort of agricultural industrial system.
I'm going to cut in like a scythe cutting through corn here, because we have got some time scales to be aware of, and we're going to go to Seth. Seth, the treatment of animals and the mass extermination of animals for meat is unacceptable, and we should all be vegetarians or vegans. What do you think?
Well, I don't know about the totalitarian or sort of a edict there that everybody must do something, but I do think one angle that I think Anthony and Phil covered it and about beat it as much to death as you could get from all the other angles, so I don't got really anything on that. I will just say from the moral aspect, one thing that has always really rattled me is look into and actually watch how is what Phil had put up of showing how the dairy industry works and what they're doing to these calves or what they do to these dairy cows, what with halal or kosher slaughter, what they're doing to those animals as well, what just any major mass farm industry does, because corporatism is death. It's just this putting a dollar sign on everything and reducing life, literally the most, what one would say, sacred thing that exists, for it's no amount of money can bring life back from the dead there, can't buy it back. It's just being totally hoard out as nothing. I mean, really, just watch that. Watch that. There's more than enough documentaries put out by people that are vegans or vegetarians in order to try and sway you to their viewpoint. And I'm not saying you have to be swayed to their viewpoint. What I'm saying is that you should do is at very least challenge yourself as somebody that is an omnivore, or in many cases here in America at least, a mainly carnivore, because the amount of meat, especially red meat, the average American eats every single year is absolutely insane. And that's about all I got to say on it.
And Anonymous actually stood in the middle of a town centre, I'm not sure which town or city, when they actually played videos similar to the one Phil showed, which you can find actually on the Truth Sentinel Facebook page. So everyone go and join and sign up to be a friend of the Truth Sentinel page, which I think might even be called Scott Sentinel, so search for that as well. And you should find the video. But I think Anonymous played that video in the middle of a city centre wearing their masks and just played it so people walking past would stop and have a look. If you can see the video, I think it's worth looking at, just so you're under no illusions as to what could be happening just in the creation of milk. And I'm sure they chose an extreme example, but I wouldn't doubt that it's happening on a fairly large scale. So moving on to our next topic, breastfeeding in public. Women shouldn't breastfeed in public. It upsets people, including some people whose faith requires women to cover up at all times. But not only those particular people, it upsets other people who just find it uncomfortable to be around or inappropriate in certain areas. So breastfeeding in public, is there a time and a place to do it? or women shouldn't breastfeed in public, full stop. Be interested to know your views. My view is breastfeeding in public is fine, basically. If you can't deal with a woman breastfeeding in public, then you haven't probably reached full adulthood, in my opinion. That's not to say I can understand some people might feel uncomfortable sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's a natural process. And I sometimes sit next to babies on planes, and they're often screaming. And if a woman breastfeeds her child, and that means I get a peaceful flight, then I'm all for it. But just generally anyway, I do think it's natural, and I don't have a massive problem with nakedness even, although there are some people take it maybe to an extreme level. There are activists in America, in the UK, just off the top of my head, who insist on walking around everywhere in public naked. I think that might be a step too far in the wrong direction, but certainly breastfeeding I have no problem with. I think sometimes we have to make concessions when children are around, and that's just part of life. But it's been interesting to know what you guys think.
Well, I mean, I'm a little on the fence on this one. I've read views on this, mostly from people who are in favour of breastfeeding in public, and the views strike me as being, in some cases, quite militant. My feeling is, like, be aware, be sensitive, and be sensible about it. To give you an example, if you're this is from a real situation in my life. If you're on a plane and and you have a crying baby, it's really important that you do something to make that baby feel happy, not only for the other passengers but for the baby. But at the same time, if there are people around who are obviously going to be offended, do what you can. Don't take the attitude of, well, you can all get lost with your immature attitudes to this. Here it is. Be a little sensitive and do what you can. Try to balance the needs of your baby with the kind of the situation if possible. And I think in most cases it's going to be fine.
I agree there, Anthony, 100%. I genuinely think that this topic for some reason has just been absolutely blown out of proportion by the media, as far as trying to make it, as far as like the Fox News angle, which I'm sure there would be many people that are absolute prudes there on Fox News, to the point of saying there should be no breastfeeding in public. That's absolutely disgusting, or something along those lines. But it's just, as Scott had brought up, an absolutely natural process that happens. And my goodness, if you haven't seen a woman breastfeeding and you're above 18 years old, my God, hell, if you're above like 10 years old and you have never seen this, I don't know what planet you're on, or maybe you need to have a talk with somebody. Maybe we need to get like, the talk. Maybe that needs to happen, because just what the hell? Do we not understand this? But of course, in most Western nations, we are so completely and totally poisoned against the idea of nudity, or the idea of anything to do with the human body, that we're just such ugly, disgusting creatures that most people have just been. They want to talk about body shaming with other people, or fat shaming or something along those lines. The average person there has been so self-shamed into self-hatred that it's ridiculous. But of course, women should not be banned from breastfeeding in public. I do think, as Anthony said, there is a certain amount of discretion that could be used there, or whatever, because one doesn't necessarily just need to be a little bit crass. I mean, this is the controversial topic: hanging their tits in the face, bare-breastedness in the face of people that are obviously made uncomfortable by this. I mean, that's literally, you're just pushing it to the point of being an asshole, and that's not necessary. That is completely and totally one's own prerogative. But anybody that's really advocating that women cover up all the time for this type of thing, are these the same sort of guys that believe men should never walk around without a shirt on during the summertime or something like that? Because, I mean, come on, it's obviously, you can show the tops of the breasts, you can show cleavage, you can show all this, but you just can't show nipples. Nipples are the bad thing, right? So, I mean, guys, men have nipples. Do you want, like, women to get little pasties photoshopped of, like, a man's nipple over their nipple so that it's okay for them to walk around in public? Because, I mean, it's obviously so different, right?
We've reached a massive milestone in Truth Sentinel history. We've talked about nipples as a topic. Maybe we're getting maybe we're getting short of topics.
Yeah, I agree with Seth. I saw though on the other side, like you mentioned the extreme arguments that you hear in places like Fox News, but I mean there are extreme arguments on the other side as well. I think it was in the Huffington Post, one of the journalists, and I'm putting that in rabbit ears, one of the journalists there said, if you suggest to a woman that perhaps she buys a nursing cover, which are available, you can get these little covers so that you can, breastfeed under a little sheet or whatever. If anyone suggests to you that you buy a nursing cover, suggest to them that they, from now on, eat all their meals under a blanket. And I thought to myself, you're getting a little bit militant about this.
Oh, yeah, it's ridiculous.
All calm down and be sensible,
At the same time, I don't think a woman should have to buy a cover. Again, that's kind of like pandering a bit too much, I mean.
But nobody ever said in that case that somebody have to do something, as they just brought up. If somebody even dare suggest it, that they must be some sort of disgusting bigot there. And I think that people do that, as Anthony was just bringing up, on all sides of even the last two issues that we just talked about, of vegetarianism and veganism and racism there. I think that people purposely go on either side of this to try and create a shortfall in the debate so that somebody it literally has to go left or right. They have to take one of these two extreme positions rather than simply being reasonable, sensible, and trying to use some sort of logic and not commit as many goddamn logical fallacies as one possibly can in as short a period of time as possible.
Yeah, like a few of you have mentioned previously, there's always someone who's going to be offended.
Yeah, for me, I don't really understand the offence. It seems like the most natural thing in the world, but I guess there are a lot of things in our society that sort of, where we're brought up in this society, that have taken away the nature from what is natural. And breastfeeding, nakedness, the human body itself. Maybe it's a bit of a legacy from sort of Christian origins. I don't really know. I don't really care.
Phil,
but
before you continue, are you doing this interview naked?
How did you guess? No, I'm not. My nipples are exposed, but
okay,
otherwise
good.
So I don't really have much more to add than what Seth and Anthony already said. But the only thing I would say is that there's a kind of, again, it's part. I can't think of another word apart from legacy. Like, there's a legacy kind of being handed down from mother to child, and that legacy is contained within the milk. I know that sounds strange, but there's been a lot of research done into breastfeeding recently, and that they realised that the mother's emotional state has a huge impact on the quality of the milk that is being produced in the breasts, and that has an immediate effect on the breast. So if a woman is feeling like she's offending people by breastfeeding her baby, and all of those people are sort of saying, "Oh, go take it somewhere else," or whatever, and she has to go and sit in a toilet in a public place that smells of urine and is not a very nice place, and the woman is sort of feeling a little bit, just not very nice in herself, then that emotional state is going to be passed into the milk, and obviously going to be passed into the baby through what he or she is feeding. And so there's I don't know enough about it myself, but there's been a lot of research done into this, and I find it fascinating. It's basically goes along with that saying of "you are what you eat," and for a baby especially, this is a really important time for gaining nutrition, for gaining their nourishment, and if they're being fed off milk that is kind of turning sour, you might say, because of the different chemicals that are being pumped into the breasts from the emotional state of the mother, then that's kind of a sad thing. It's something that people should be aware of.
Well, I'd say that goes beyond just specifically breastfeeding, though, Phil. That goes to all aspects of our society. And again, some of the subjects we'd already talked about, and the next one we're going to talk about. It's this idea of a culture of shame, a culture of guilt, where eventually people have gotten to the point that they're in this constant, chronic fatigue state, where emotionally they are completely and totally peaked out the entire time, and their bodies are producing all these hormones that are just like fight or flight hormones all the time, until they've gotten so exhausted that intellectually even they don't have time to give a damn about anything like this, and they would even view something as this discussion or debate, as some would rather try and frame this, between everybody here, as it's just a waste of time, or I don't have time for that, or anything like that, because it's simply too much for them intellectually, because they're completely and totally drained.
And that was proof that men can talk about breasts without being juvenile.
Yeah, don't be a boob, Scott.
Oh, damn it, you had to go and ruin it. I did edit out many juvenile comments during this the recording of that. I didn't really. That was a joke. That was a juvenile joke. We're going to leave it there for today and continue this controversial topics episode on another episode coming soon. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, like I said, go to our website www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and you can find all the links to all the networks like the Dark Matter Digital Network, Deep Talk Radio, Alien Dreams, and the 2 YouTube channels are on there. You can also find the chat box and the voicemail, so you can leave a voicemail and give us your opinions, which we can put on the show. There's also, you can sign up to the website. So you sometimes get a newsletter and information about upcoming guests. And you can also make donations there. We really appreciate those, especially at the moment. We need to buy some new equipment. And you can find links there to all the episodes, all the past episodes. There's about 70 plus at the moment, and more to put up on YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel. Just type in YouTube, Truth Sentinel with Scott. There's 2 YouTube channels actually. Try to sign up to both of them if you can. Also, if you go to our website, you can also find t-shirts there at trutht-shirts.com. Use the code TRUTH1 and you get a 10% discount, and we get a small donation. If you'd like to contact me because you have something to advertise, or you just want to talk about something or suggest a guest, email me at scottsentinel9@gmail.com. In the meantime, have a great week. Goodbye.